Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining me today. This is the Q&A for lesson 2, and we have a few things to cover. It's actually a pretty important week in the course because today we're going to be looking at creating a base plan and the client survey. So those are actually two really important parts of a design process. And yeah, we're going to get a really good hopefully by the end of the call, everybody has a great understanding of what is expected in terms of what they're to place on a base map and the importance of the client survey. So maybe what I'll do for the moment is just share my screen, and we'll take a look at what is up with lesson number 2 here. There we go. Okay. So what I'm sure most of you have probably looked at this already, but lesson number 2, basically has two components to it. We have a base plan, and then we have the client survey, and they're both really important steps in the design process. And we're going to kind of walk through as to why that might be. And if we take a look at the base plan, I would highly recommend everybody have a good read here, not right now necessarily, but before you start your assignment, and just get an understanding of the expectations of what's to be placed on your base map. And I do recommend that just to keep in mind with one thing, the better your base map is, so the more energy and the more accurate that is, the easier the additional assignments and the layers that we're going to place on top of that are going to be. So you really want to try and as accurately as possible illustrate your project site, and base plans are really about what is happening on that site right now. So they're a reflection of I guess they're a reflection of existing conditions, right? So it's really important to know that. We're going to be diving into the site analysis over the next few weeks, but the base map's really a good starting point for that. So where are our structures, our infrastructure that's coming in, any major or significant landscape element. And we're going to go through a couple of examples here that will help out, but there's a few different ways you can do this. You can either do this using your computer, or you can do this by hand. And I'll show you a couple of examples that are showing both, and it really doesn't matter to myself what you prefer. I think the main thing is that you don't spend the majority of your time trying to figure out the software, right? So if you're having to document your base map using the computer, and it's really frustrating, and just you're having to spend most of your time and energy figuring it out, I would suggest you might want to switch to just using a hand-drawn method. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. So here's some of the elements that we want to see on there, and there are some suggestions here as a good starting point. So I would say for this class and for this exercise, you could certainly go onto Google Earth, take a screenshot of that. You'd actually most likely have to take, I'll show you a trick with that. Maybe I'll start that up and we can take a peek at Google Earth. because you want to make sure you have a scale included. And there's an easy way to do that, which we will take a look at right now. So we'll just go through, I'm just loading it up here, so it'll be a couple of seconds, and maybe I will zoom in on my property. Okay, we'll just switch over to the other screen. Okay. So this is, let's say this is the property that we're wanting to document. Okay. And you'll notice if you're using Google Earth, and it's a great tool, I use it quite a bit. Not so much for documenting designs because it's not very accurate, right? There's a lot left to be desired with its accuracy, but I think for this class, it's really a perfect tool. And you'll notice if you zoom in and you zoom out, the perspective changes quite a bit. And that can be a little bit troubling. If you're trying, let's say we're zooming in here and we're trying to get a good image, a good snapshot of this property right here. Okay, one of the tricks you want to do is tap on the U key, and that'll bring the image into a 2D overhead mode. Okay, and that is where we want to capture it for our base plan work. The other thing is we want to be very cognizant of, what is north, and you can see, you can play around with this. But let's say we're not north and we want to get there quickly. We just have to type the N key on the keyboard, and we're going to be north up. So if we have that, we would just go to print this, and we're going to ask it to save it as a PDF. And you notice when I hit print, right down in the corner here, I got a north arrow and I have a scale bar. So that's the advantage of using the print sequence. And then of course we can just hit save as PDF, and let's see here, I could just drop it on my desktop, and it might take a minute, and then that's that. If I want to take a look at that to see how it turned out, we can switch over, and there is the PDF. So this is directly overhead. I have a scale bar and I have a north arrow. So that's a pretty good start. At least that will help me basically trace over any of these elements that I want to include. All right, so that is one way you can use your Google Earth to help you out with the base plan, at least the beginnings of it. We'll go back to.
Oh yeah, also, I was gonna say, when I opened Google Earth on my computer, it was in like a 3D mode where it had like the terrain and everything.
Yeah.
If you like check the little checkbox on terrain, then it gets rid of the 3D stuff and it's just 2D, or like bird's eye. So yeah.
Yeah, so there are a few settings that I didn't touch on. That's one of them, the terrain setting. And if you want, we can just take a quick peek at that again. There we go. And so I'm using Google Earth Pro, and that'll be a little different than the web-based, or the, I shouldn't say web-based. There's another version of it that you would be able to get to using, I'm just trying to think, while using any other device on the desktop, it would be through a browser, and it doesn't have quite the same capabilities. But if you do go, and you probably can't see my screen with the preferences here. Can you see that at all? Probably not. Maybe what I'll do, I'll just There we go. Now you can see the desktop. So there are the preferences for Google Earth Pro, and the terrain is right here. There's an elevation exaggeration. So you can, go right up to 3. And then if you are looking at the terrain, I don't have a lot of interesting terrain to look at here at the moment. It will highly exaggerate it. Sorry, I'm not doing a very good job of showing you that exaggeration. But most of the time, you're going to want to stay in this 2D overhead for mapping purposes, because as soon as you get into a perspective view, your scale is going to be thrown off because the line at the back of the property is now going to be shorter than the line at the front here, when in fact they're even. So I would recommend using Google Earth Pro for this. It's a free download. And there we go. And again, just use that U key and the N key to get positioned for printing. So hopefully that helps you there. But yeah, if anybody has questions as we're going through here, feel free to jump in or put your hand up in the chat there. Either one, whatever works for you. I'll just make sure I've got the chat open so I can, there we go. Perfect. Okay. So that is a starting point with a lot of drawings. Now, you may be in a position where you have like I believe Lola has a plot plan of her property, because it's a newer property, one that you've just purchased. So often you'll get a survey plan showing the building footprint and the property lines and possibly some other features outside the property. And that's a great way of starting as well. You can basically use that as a template to start building on. It won't have all of these elements, so you'd almost want to trace over it or make a copy of it to build on that. But what you want to try and do is include these elements. And you may not include all of them, but there's certainly some that you'd want to look at. So obvious ones would be, the project name, the site, and designer name, and the location and date. So these are things that you'll want to repeat on every single design sheet that you do. And along with the north arrow and a compass or compass and a scale. So that's really important to establish. So if we have a really good base plan and a scale established on that, then every other assignment you do, when you're adding a new layer on top of that, it's going to be a nice, easy exercise for you. We want to look at all the structures. So that might be a house, a garage, a barn, all kinds of different possibilities there. The roof, the ridges. So where the ridge on that roof is and where the water would flow off of that ridge. That will be super helpful when we get to lesson number 5. And then we want all the pathways and the roads. Again, those are going to become, those will be an ongoing reference during the assignment or future assignments. You might have underground utilities. Newer homes will have that. Oh, sorry, did somebody have a question? Oh, okay. So underground, overhead, if you can find contour lines, that is a great thing to include. And for those that are in an urban setting, I will show you what I would recommend. If you're having trouble finding contour lines, go to a site called Contour Creator. And I'm not sure where we'll go. So basically, you go to Contour Creator and you type in your address that you want to go to, and then it's very much a Google interface here. And what you'd then do is look at what we're trying to show. And what I often do is I will let's put the units in feet, and we'll say we want to have a contour every 1 foot. And that could be what we want to do. Often in an urban setting, that is what we'll be looking at. And then all we do, once we've finished that, is we'll click in a couple of opposing corners, and then we can make an adjustment here. And then we're going to ask it to get the data. And then boom, we have a 1 foot contour interval with a legend here. And as you can see, the legend only takes us so far. But if this was too busy and too much info, we could just change that and ask it to redraw. And then that makes it a little bit easier to see. This is more of a 5-acre site. So that's one of the ways you can get contour information. And then the tricky part is we have to print this or take a screenshot, and then you'd have to basically trace it onto your base plan, right? We'd have to scale it up and trace it. Now, these contours are not horribly accurate. For this class, I think it's just great, but if you were doing a design for somebody, this would not be what you'd want to utilize. So if you live in the US, particularly, let's say Oregon, there's an awful lot of resources for contour data. You might be able to find that for free. Google Earth and Google Earth Pro are based on 10-meter contours, so they're really widely spaced. And that's what this information is pulled from. So that's why it's not horribly accurate. But it is accurate enough, and I know my property here, and it's pretty close. I wouldn't want to rely on it totally, though. But for this class, again, that's a great way to go. I don't want to get too distracted, but that is, and we'll probably cover this again when we get to probably lesson 5, because in lesson 5, we're going to take these contours to calculate water flows on our project sites. You want to include fences and waterways and any spigots. If you're on acreage like we are, you'd want to locate your well. And any significant vegetation. So when I say that, I don't, significant trees and shrubs. If you have some smaller perennials, I wouldn't get too worried about those. You could certainly list them. That's a good idea. Like when we go to document a site, we will indicate where the significant trees and shrubs are, as well as making a list of all the other plants that are less significant that we may utilize within the drawing when we do another planting plan. So a legend or a key, it's a good idea. If you don't do this, you just need to label, right? But I think it's probably easier to use a legend. The property boundaries in preferably red. That's what I'm used to, and that makes it sort of stand out. And then any easements. So often properties will have easements within them, and that's really important to document because you do not want to be designing anything permanent or significant that goes into these areas because they might be disrupted down the road. And then any other important features. So let us take a look at some examples here. No, I don't want to start with that one. There we go. No.
I was also kind of wondering, the like utilities and stuff. So, um, is there like a way that you can use? I mean, that's probably not like standardized. Like, you can't like look for any place in the U.S., but like, I don't really know how to find my like below ground utilities unless it's like.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. It, the answer would be it depends. So if you live in the city or in a city center, um, they often have ArcGIS maps, right? So what those are is they're interactive maps. And if you go to, so I live close to the city of Nanaimo, and I won't go through that here today, but if I logged on to the city of Nanaimo and then searched for mapping, their GIS mapping, they would have this interactive map that would show up on a browser. So I wouldn't need any special software to see it. And then you can, on the layers section of those maps, they often have utilities, and you can use that to determine where water, gas, perhaps power are coming into the property. So that's one way of doing it. On acreage properties, that's not often the case. You know, you're kind of left on your own with that, but you'll know where the well is. And if you know where your house is, it's often a pretty straight line between them for that service. So the interactive maps are really, really helpful, and that would be a good starting point. That would be my recommendation. Here is an example of a base map, and you can see the student put the property boundary, so a dashed red line. That's great. Could be solid, could be dashed, doesn't really matter. Then there's, I believe, showing a fence just inside of that. That's all the way around the property. There's some existing trees and shrubs here. There's the structures and an indication of the direction of the water flow off of that ridge. And there's a couple other little structures here. And of course, there's a legend on the left that will explain what these various symbols mean. And the alternative is putting labels here. So I think it's much easier, and the template set up for the legend. So following that, I think is a great idea. Again, there's paved surfaces, garden beds, there's a pond, there's a number of things here. So this person got pretty specific with their landscape elements. And just trying to figure out what they have done best. So this is mixed forest. So that's a good thing to point out. Often with larger properties, we're going to have a lot of wooded areas, and you don't want to necessarily have to put a tree symbol for every single tree. So here you can basically do what I would call a cloud. So it's a solid area that represents this mixed forest. So mixed would be conifers and deciduous trees. And then we have our north arrow, scale, and the scale bar can be, any multitude of different looks, but this one's just fine. And over here we have the coordinates and a little bit about the acreage, dimensions, and the elevation. So that's a nice clean base plan. And you can see that sort of placing even if you visualize, you place a trace paper over this gives us a really good start as to what is existing on the site and what we have to, because these are all constraints, right? You're likely not to move your driveway, and you're likely not to move the forest and all these buildings. So it's vital to know where those are located. This is a colorized version, and I think he's included the utilities here. Yeah, he's got some utilities. So ideally, and then here's one showing some contours. So you can see where he got these. He kind of, undoubtedly, they came off of Contour Creator, and he's placed these labels here to show that these are 2-meter contour intervals. Now, metric or US or imperial units, it doesn't really matter, but labeling them is important, just so we know what they are, right? It could be 1 foot, it could be 1 meter. This takes all the guessing out of it. So ideally with this map, we would want to have some of these utilities as part of it. So you just have one map to play with. So is there any questions about that?
Jamie, I have a question. In my case, in Google Earth, I really don't see much. I don't see the limits of the property or anything. So I am not including Google Earth in my base map because it does not give me much information.
Right. Sure. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
It can be, this is really informative as it is. Now you can see if you're able to place Google Earth, under it, it's interesting. But it's certainly not vital.
Yeah, because I do not really know where it starts or ends in Google Earth. I don't have the information.
Right, right. Well, I seem to recall looking at your site, and it was at least when the Google Earth image was taken, it was a subdivision under construction. So there's not a lot to look at.
No, there is.
Yeah, so you'll have to wait a few years for the images to catch up. But
no, but what I have is enough to do the plan. It's okay.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. So use what you have. And if you can integrate any of this stuff, that's great. Let me just show you. So here's another example. And this person did not want to use the computer, which is completely fine. And this base map gets across the same information, the property line. There's some fencing in here. There's a driveway, there's the house, garage. Looks like there's a vegetable garden in the back and a barn. So that's easy to read, right? And that's half of it is imagining somebody is looking at your drawing and you're not there to explain it. So that, this person doesn't have to be here in order to explain their base map. It's pretty straightforward. Could it be better? Well, sure. I mean, there's always room for improvement with everybody's, including myself. Whenever we do our design work, we're always looking at ways to improve it. But I would far prefer someone go this route than to struggle with the computer. And another way that you can make this hand-drawn a little bit easier so that it's to scale is to use a grid, grid paper, and consider each grid to be, maybe it's 1 foot squares or 2 foot or, whatever works out. You can get different types of grid paper as well. So that is another option. And I believe I have one more example here. This, let me see. Yeah, this is a PDF. So here is a here we go. Here is the base map. And that was done on a computer. And this looks great. It's an eco village, so it's a much larger area. But even without looking at the legend, it's pretty clear where the trees are. where the bodies of water are and the structures. Let me see what this is here. It might be a little wetland. Yes, it's a floodplain. So this is a wonderful, very nice job. And this will be really easy for the student to work from. So to build off of, because this is really that bottom layer of your design. So if you can do your best effort here, it's going to make it much easier as you go through. If you rush it and it's not got the information that's useful on it, then you're gonna, run into a few challenges, right? So those were the three, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 3 samples. So again, if you want to look at any of the student samples, you would go into the modules section, and I believe it's in the resource section of the modules right here, sample student reports. And those might be really interesting for you. That's one of the ways that I've sort of expanded my knowledge. When I first started in the landscape industry, I went through an apprenticeship program and was trained by the Vancouver Park system in BC here. But it didn't cover design at all. It was really about park maintenance, and I had to teach myself, and part of that was looking at other people's work and knowing what really appealed to you and what didn't. So I would encourage everybody, if they want, to take a look at these reports here. So lots of good resources in here. It may just.
Could I ask a question real quick?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
So, one thing about my site that seems different than a lot of these examples is my site is quite large, 42 acres, and it's almost all forested.
Right.
And so, I guess my base map, I don't know how useful it is for the whole thing to be a cloud of mixed forest. Yet also there's like, hundreds or thousands of trees on this property.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I'm not really sure what will be the most useful for this base map.
Well, do you have a structure or a building on the site, or is it empty lot? When I say empty of human presence.
It's essentially empty. There, there's a small structure that was just like almost like a hunting cabin. It was it's an open lean-to on this site. And other than that, there's almost nothing. So there's not quite a homestead, and last week I asked about a homestead, like, oh, should I should I put out a proposed structure? Yes. And I think I could do that. Is this the stage that I would want to do that?
Right. Well, that's a really good question. And you're right, 42 acres is a good size. I don't think you have a lot of choice in terms of how you're going to show the forest, because you'd probably spend an entire week just drawing individual symbols if that's the way you wanted to go. So I would head down that cloud pathway, and you could even shade it, right? Depending on if you're doing this by hand or using the computer. So using a computer, and it's not really worth going down that road today, but the software we use, we can put, say, 1,000 trees together, and we can have them sort of link up and join, so they almost create a cloud themselves. So I think I think you could do that quite effectively. just make sure that you're going to be able to show some of those key elements below the trees. So where you have any water flowing through the property, which I recall you do, and the
Yes.
structure, as well as I would consider placing a proposed building footprint
Great.
as if you're going to be building. And it doesn't, you know, it's an exercise. I would put it, you know, where it would make sense, fairly close to your entrance. You obviously wouldn't want to have to drive into the middle of the property to get to your house. Like you might like that from a privacy perspective, but you might not want to pay the thousands of dollars to build the road. So often, you know, roads are you know, that access layer would come later. Like if we looked at certain design protocols, like there's a farm design protocol that we use called the agrarian platform, and if we're placing buildings on a site, it comes much later in the design. It's not at the beginning. So I would just do your best with that. And maybe if you're interested in a little 1,000 square foot footprint somewhere, I would place that there and label it as a proposed building footprint. And then you could have a proposed driveway leading to that. And those two elements are really going to help you as we go along with the other assignments. And it doesn't really matter if it's a completely wooded site. You're still going to have opportunity within that. You obviously don't want to be cutting down all your trees, but you'd probably have to do some selective clearing for your homestead and maybe a bit of vegetable cultivation. So does that sort of help you? I'll if you want, I can try and look at a couple of designs that we've done and see and show you some examples of, you know, larger wooded areas and how we made them look. But it really boils down to just that cloud.
Yeah.
Let me
You know, Jamie, I would definitely appreciate that. And I'm not sure if this would be taking too much time from others because of the scale differences, but.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I could, let me just take a peek right now, but it might take me a few minutes to find something appropriate. We're involved on a large property right now, but it's mainly cleared, so that's not gonna. Sorry, I'm just looking through my files here. That may be something I'll message you with.
Great, Jamie. That would be really helpful. Just to have a nice example for me to look at.
Sure. Yeah, I will do that after today's class because a lot of these larger sites are surrounded by trees. Well, we can take a peek at this one. Let's see if this. Yeah. If we just ignore most of the drawing and look at the, you know, this is just the outer edge, but you can see if you have to individually draw those, that wouldn't be a very fun task. So we just drop these symbols in, which makes it really easy. And I know I have a cloud here. I've got to find. And I'll just try and open it and see. Yeah, that has a little bit of it's quite an old drawing we did about 10 years ago. So I'll just have to wait for it to load here. I don't have a PDF of it. Let us go back to. It'll take a couple of seconds here for my software to load. Yeah, so we'll get you. Oh. Has to convert it, so. I think it's almost ready. And it's just about there. Sorry. All right. So Will, you can't see beyond, but this is the sort of thing I'm talking about, where it's really just a filled polygon to represent a forest. And you know, this could have gone way back. And in fact, it did, just in this particular drawing. We just needed to show the perimeter. But I would try and do something like that has a bit of undulation because it has a feel of a canopy. Whereas if we go back to what we were looking at before, this, you know, this isn't quite as organic, right? So if you want to, if you're trying hard to make something feel like a wooded area and you can give some wave to the edge, you know, it'll probably appear and be obvious. So let me, you'll have to leave that with me. I'll see if I can find anything else that might help you, but yeah, your base map might be pretty quick. But you do have other elements. You'll, yeah, you have other elements you'll want to get in there, and property line is one of them. And again, take a look at. Oh, there we go. Just take a look at the list here and see if what's appropriate, you know, and again, put your proposed building in there, and you don't have to go any further than that for now. But you might then want to think of, okay, if I was building here, what's my, you know, light level going to be like? Am I wanting to clear some trees? And you could even draw a perimeter of showing the proposed area you're going to clear, because you'd have to most likely clear some, as hard as that would be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just want to make sure, you know, I'm recognizing that this will probably be an easy map for me. And so I just want to make sure that I have the right information to do all the rest of the design work.
Sure. And if there's, you know, with the feedback I provide, I will usually do it through video. So that will at least, if I have an example I want to show anybody, because I don't think they've done something, it's not often the case, but sometimes people just have to add a little bit more info. But if you've taken a look at this list, the odds are you're going to cover everything off. So,
Great.
yeah. Now, the other important thing that we haven't touched on with the design process and with this particular assignment is the client survey. So, as a designer, this is a really vital part, because you can be hired to do a project, and you might go to the site and have these visions for the site. But if they do not align with your client's wishes, then you're going to have you'll probably get some feedback. So the survey is a great idea. We have a questionnaire we ask people to fill in, and that's a good starting point. And then we will dive a little bit deeper into some of these aspects that, the biggie is people's, likes and dislikes, what their vision is, and whether that might, be in alignment with their budget, which isn't discussed here. But if you are designing for somebody else, it's a big part of it, right? You've got to try and make it as good a fit as possible. And that's probably one of the hardest parts of the survey with a prospective client, or a client is trying to figure out, okay, you have this property and this is what you want to do, and what kind of resources do you have to throw at it, whether it's they're doing it themselves perhaps, or whether they're wanting to, hopefully having yourself help them with it. But it has to line up, and as best as you can. So this is a really important part to go through. And I believe with the template here, let me just pull that up. Some fairly basic stuff. It's not too deep. So if this is your property, you would go through this as if you are the client. And if it indeed, I think, Will, for yourself, you're using a piece of land that is not yours, and perhaps you don't know whose it is. Is that correct? Or so you might not have a client?
In my case, it's actually it's family owned.
Oh, okay, perfect. So you'll want to determine who you're going to view as the client, and then have a little interview with them. And there's some really good basic questions here. So they might seem a little bit funny, but they aren't. And here you go. Initial budget. That's really important, especially for, doing this for somebody else, right? That's really vital, because you can create the Taj Mahal, but if the budget isn't there, then it's going to be a waste of time for everybody. So it's a good thing to just keep in the back of your head. It's not relevant necessarily for your exercise here. Now, if you have multiple clients, there's a page for that as well. So that's worth looking at. And then it's really about, repeating some of what you've done with the base plan, where you're looking at that, the inventory of the site, what they have and what they wish. So that's also a really important part, is knowing what you need to add to get them to their goal here. So there's a couple pages there, and then we go through. These are great questions: what your clients like most about the site and what they like least about the site. And that's sounds like a very simple question, but you may be quite surprised if, again, you're creating something for a client, the more information you can get, the better. And then again, top concerns, top goals, and this is really important too, the overall vision, what they overall see on the macro for that site. And then of course you got an opportunity for questions or feedback there. And if we look at the template file for the base map, there are all sorts of resources here, master legend, inventory, and some plant choices as well. Yeah, so there's been a lot of work that has gone into the template to make the course much easier and a lot more streamlined for people. So, I would suggest you take a close look at this and use what you can out of here. And again, if you're doing anything by hand, then a lot of this, a lot of the stuff in the legend won't be really pertinent, but do be mindful of the scale bar, because often people will drop their base map in here and they won't really pay attention to the scale bar. And this is just an example. It's not scaled to your drawing, right? So yeah, let us take a look at, sorry, I keep having to move this to get to the top. So those are the two items. If we take a look at the rubric, you can see the base map has 10 points and the client interview has 10 points associated. So that tells you they're both pretty important, right? So they're both going to take a little bit of time and energy. And if anybody gets stuck at all, don't hesitate to drop me a note and I'll help you out the best I can. There's a lot of resources here already, with how to make a scale bar, how to use, an iPad. That's a really useful tool if you have. We have an iPad. We don't use it for design work, but you certainly can using a software. Oh gosh, what's the name of it? Called Trace. I think it's called Morpheo Trace. It's very, again, though, you don't want to dive into using something that you're not familiar with for the course. I think you really want to dial into, the permaculture process and what that's all about. But then you have all sorts of resource videos here. So you could spend an awful lot of time just going through the resources, let alone all the content that that Andrew's put together for you. And I think that's about it. Does anybody have any questions at all about this assignment for next week? I'm happy to chat about that or any other.
I have a question about the peer evaluation, like peer review.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, do we leave them a feedback on the discussion, the chat, or do we comment on their slides, or like what would be the format for doing that?
Yeah. Well, what most people will do is they'll go to the discussion board. So let's say you posted lesson 2 and a bunch of other people have as well. And you would just want to go and take a look at a couple of students' work and provide some meaningful feedback within the discussion board. That's the best place.
Okay.
You're quite right. If you can leave comments in a Google document often if it's shared with that purpose. But that can be, it can be quite confusing because we might think, oh, there's no you would, if everybody did that, there would be absolutely no feedback on the discussion board, and that it's actually nice to have some interaction there. So that's where I would leave your feedback.
Okay, and I also have another question about the contour. Like the contour, because my site is quite small. The elevation change is within like 2 feet.
Right.
Then the contour line, I was using that website you mentioned, and I found that they have like straight lines for the same elevation. Just
Right.
probably just to show the change, like less than 1 feet change.
Right.
So I don't know if I put like straight lines with the same number, like 300 feet, but street line showing 300 feet. Is that okay?
Yeah, you can, if you were using Contour Creator, you could even do a 6-inch if you wanted.
Oh,
So
okay.
a half foot. And you just, if you have that on your drawing and you just want to label 2 of the lines, that would be good. So we know what direction the slope is going.
Okay, I see.
You know, on an urban site, that's often just fine. It's whatever you feel comfortable with. A 1-foot contour, if you only have 2 or 3 contours on the site, might be a little bit tricky. I would just try and see if you can bring the resolution up, maybe go with 6-inch.
Okay, I see.
If that gives you a little better feel of where water is going to flow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I have another question, like also related to contour, because the contour line also goes to the building. I don't, is that necessary to draw those because it's covered by the building?
Yeah, you could just go up to the building and then it'll probably have an exit point on the other side.
Okay.
You could do that, sure.
Okay.
I don't often show anything below a building. That would be a little bit tricky. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, you go ahead. I was just gonna ask
Okay.
for other questions.
Cool. Yeah. So I know that so like I'm going to be able to get interviews with a lot of people that like literally own the site, but I really wanted to make it into like a community design process. So I'm thinking that like, will I have like an opportunity to do like quote unquote client interviews with like a group, or is there like a way that I can do that later? Sorry, like,
yeah, it's tough when you have a lot more people involved.
yeah, right.
Yeah. So you may want to you know, generalize it, right? So you could say, well, with this group, you know, one of their desired outcomes or goals would be increasing their food security. You know, a place to get fresh, nutritious food. You know, going down that road, because it would be really difficult to, well, it may not be. I mean, if you could pull a bunch of people together and do sort of a group interview, you're certainly welcome to do that. It is a really important step in the process, but if we also realize with the course, sometimes people are going to be designing spaces that it's almost a fictitious project, right? So there's a little bit of I've had a number of people design public spaces for community gardens, etc. And I'm trying to remember how their client interview went, but I think it was fairly generalized, that they recognized the community, let's say, was a bit of a food desert and needed to increase their resilience, and that this was going to be part of it, and that was sort of an agreed upon, you know, with the group, that was an agreed upon goal. I don't know if that helps you at all.
Yeah, I think like what you said about like having groups and then like they're maybe not competing, but like, well, yeah, like shared interest and competing interests. And then doing like a group interview at some point makes a lot of sense. So I'll yeah, in that case, I'll just talk to who I can in the meantime, and that sounds cool. So
yeah. Like if you did indeed have a group of people, and I know Andrew was doing a design for a group in Saudi Arabia that were putting together an eco village. you definitely have to have everybody on board, and you'd have to have, you know, a really thorough process to flush out what it is they're trying to achieve, and some of the things they don't like about the site, what they do like. You know, it would be a pretty deep process. But in this exercise, we really want everybody to realize how important that is, but that in certain situations, to get your design sort of moving forward, you just have to make some assumptions. Yeah, it'd be like interviewing yourself, right? If you had a property, and if it's not as hard, I guess, with couples or families, but with an individual, you have to sort of interview yourself, which may be a little bit tricky, but again, it's just an important step in the process, and just want you to do your best on it and really focus on putting the best base plan together that you can.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, is there anybody else have any other questions about this assignment coming up? And if there is something, actually, you know what? I did not reference the Q&A document. Nobody put anything there, so we're okay. All righty. Well, I think if we don't have any other questions for today, we will call it a meeting, and I will post the recording on the discussion board, and looking forward to seeing everybody's work next week. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and you have yourself a great week. And if you do get into any challenging parts of putting this together, please don't hesitate to drop me a note, and I will reply as soon as I can.
Thank you very much, Jamie.
Thank you.
Okay, well, you take care.
You too, thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.